the name of the values that keep you alive, do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels on limited roads. Do not let your fire go out. Spark might replace the spark, and the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours.
Go. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crypto Economy Podcast. I'm here with Will.
How's it going, guys?
And today we're going to be talking about Asgardia, which is a space nation recently founded by a Russian billionaire that hosts about 200,000 citizens. And we're going to deconstruct it a little bit, look at how this essentially new country is trying to structure their constitution, and take our best shot at how we would structure our own version of a Cryptopia. But before that, I just wanted to take care of a few things. I know we haven't done a podcast in a couple weeks. We've been super busy on the miners. So we're getting those along. We should have a video up for you guys next week walking through the different features and essentially what we're trying to do with it and where we are now, where we're trying to go. Probably going to be raising funds for that pretty soon. So if you're an investor that might be interested, feel free to shoot us an email. The money from my totaled car, the insurance payout is only going so far, so gotta look for money eventually. Besides that, we'll put up a new article on the news site. I encourage you guys to go read that. The first iteration of Atlas is on the App Store, so you can take a look at that. Right now it's mostly just price tracking, but it's handy to have, and we'll be iterating upon that going forward.
In the future, if I'm going to comment on Atlas,
Yep.
Atlas in the future is going to have a really cool version called Crypto Fantasy, and it's a feature whereby you can go on and pretend and do mock trading and paper trading, I believe, and kind of simulate the idea of cryptocurrency trading, and it'll be pretty cool. So we'll keep you updated on that, keep you posted.
Yeah. And what we're hoping to do with the miners is incorporate all these features into the miner itself, so you can have your news platform there, you can have your trading. You can have overviews on different kinds of things, and we'll have them preloaded with a lot of the best apps and some of the companies that we've had on here, so you guys can play around with some of these things and demo them. So we're really excited for you guys to take a look at that, and it's coming along nicely. So thanks for hanging in there, and we're going to have a bunch of podcasts this week. We'll be pretty busy, so with that, we can get started.
Yep, and on the note of some of the comments we've been receiving, we do see the comments about the audio quality, and we're trying our best to solve that. We don't really have studios or anything. We're just, guys with microphones and laptops. So appreciate the feedback. It is helpful because we need to know when it's not as good as it should be. So thanks, and keep it coming for sure. And with that, I think we'll get into it.
Yeah, it's sometimes I don't like hearing the sound of my own voice, so we don't listen to them after. So it's always good to have another pair of ears on it.
Exactly.
So I think we'll get started first with a little background on Asgardia. It was started by a Russian billionaire, and his name is Igor Ashburyeli. And it's got about 200,000 members. I actually signed up a few months ago because I just thought it was an interesting concept. I know they had a summit recently, and he's bankrolling it, so it's pretty extravagant. There are people from all over the world. They talk about having essentially 12 key languages. They're trying to create really an international government that I guess exists alongside traditional countries and governments until they're at a point where they're putting up space stations that people can live at. Recently they held elections, so all the elections were done online, which I found really interesting. To run, all you had to do was upload a state-issued ID and a few other forms of documentation, and you could run.
Voter
so I thought
ID,
that
right?
was, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, they have better voter ID than we do, probably. and it seemed to go off without a hitch. They put up, a full, 20-page constitution outlining what they believe, how things are going to be structured in the beginning and then going forward. Some of their goals. There's a lot of emphasis on things like unity, interesting messages, and also some interesting economics, education policies. And so I think we can take a look at this and try and deconstruct where they're getting some of these ideas, which ones we think are going to be useful, which ones we think they should maybe stray away from, and also which seem to contradict each other. Because when you have a constitution that holds all these things in parallel and in tandem, it seems like you need one to supersede the other in a lot of cases, and we're curious about how that might happen.
Right, yeah. I mean, a lot of issues that we have today in our political system come from the Constitution conflicting with either itself or with statutes, or at least seemingly conflicting and contradicting with itself. So when you extrapolate to a much larger scale, as one would need to when having a space platform in low Earth orbit, I mean, it's not just going to be, disparate states united into one government. It's going to be disparate governments united into like a super government. So you got to be sure that the devil definitely hides in the details. You got to root him out. I do think it's a cool idea, though. I mean, I love this, even despite my disagreement with some of the certain aspects of the Constitution that they put forth on the website. But I want something that's different from the UN, because I mean, a lot of shows like The Expanse, when they're talking about human civilization compared to like Mars and Earth or Mars and the Moon, etc., in the belt, they always make the UN in control of Earth. And I don't know if anybody knows anything about the UN, but you don't want the UN to be the government of Earth.
Yeah, no,
Not.
absolutely not.
It's a good idea to kind of like brainstorm and theorize and put forward these ideas, because it's definitely going to be necessary in the near future. Thanks.
Exactly. Yeah, and at the end, thanks, Elon. At the end of the day, all you're doing is essentially structuring incentives. So that's what the Constitution really should do, and you're trying essentially to create a society with the least friction possible. So convincing people to work together in a manner in which there's the least resistance, the least wasted effort, and the most progress as a result. And that seems to be the guiding principle behind a lot of the points in the Constitution. So it seems like that's their goal. But at the same time, whenever you have a crowdsourced constitution and set of ideas, you're going to have a lot of contradictions and a lot of people trying to decide what's best for everyone. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is going to be a libertarian paradise. I don't think this is going to be, or it's meant to be, structured like a Galt's Gulch, as it's, sort of an escape for for those who are trying to live in a more meritocratic society, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a progressive vision of what the future could be, with some of those ideas mixed with a lot of the ideas that we want to do here now that we can't necessarily do until we've eliminated certain things like scarcity. So
I mean, I think it's something that seems libertarian on the surface, but it's kind of like going from the frying pan now into just a slightly smaller frying pan that has a lot more potential to grow. At least that's my understanding upon reading this and skimming through the Constitution a few times. But it reads more like the EU Charter than something like the U.S. Constitution would. So I'm eager to kind of like get in here and compare and contrast and kind of take it as a whole as well. Like, you can't just focus on the details, as I tend to do a lot. So I'll have somebody to juxtapose that.
Sure. So, I mean, I guess I'll start with just a few things that I mentioned just generally about the governmental structure. So the head of nation holds their post for 5 years, and Igor has made himself the head of nation for the first post, and he's also included a caveat that leader gets to choose his successor following his absence. So he's built in a bit of a, I guess, I don't know the word for it.
Definitely helps himself.
Yeah, I'm
gives himself a little bit of power.
It's a lot like Chinese politics in a way. So the Chinese Communist Party, essentially, the leader picks the successor. That's what happened with Xi Jinping. So it seems like they took some of the ideas from that, and they also have certain party party leaders that are fairly influential, but not necessarily parties that they've created quite yet. So there aren't political parties, but there is the sort of party leader. They talk about how heads of nation have to be between the age of 50 and under the age of 65. So you really only have a 15-year period where you're even qualified.
I like that.
And so
I mean, I kind of like that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess really that encompasses most, I guess, U.S. presidents, although we've had a lot over 65, but probably shouldn't have had
like
that,
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason it's 35 in the Constitution, because when it was written, 35 was kind of like, it was still middle age, but it was on the upper end more so than it is, like, definitely more so than it is now. And so they didn't want anybody who's still wet behind the ears to be, commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So
but
it's a good idea. I mean, that limitation on 65 seems like it could be exceeded if you have really good medicine. So I don't know about placing the upward limit on it, but I like the lower limit on it.
Yeah, that's actually something I was thinking about too, is, assuming our healthcare gets to the point where we're living longer, and every subsequent generation, I think, usually increases their expected age by about 30%, but we're actually at the first point in history where I don't think that's happening. And a lot of that is preventable diseases like heart disease, cancer, certain types of cancer, so lung cancer. So in America, not globally, but in America, we've actually hit sort of a plateau, which is not good. But anyway, assuming there's certain medical advances that allow us to jump leaps and bounds beyond what we can do now, you would think that would be a possibility. And I also think people are growing up much quicker these days. People are much more wise, much younger, and being old doesn't necessarily mean you have a lot of wisdom, as made clear by most of our Congress.
I also love how he calls himself the founding father in his kind of the Constitution. Yeah. So like something that I get talking about the devil and getting lost in the details earlier, something that kind of escaped me was, what happens if you were like 64 and you get elected? Do you get impeached the next year, or what happens? And then what happens?
I think
let's say,
at the age of, it has to be at the age of election, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. See, like the fact that we have to debate that, it's like. There's nothing like that in the Constitution, right? It says
I think there is
right?
There is a max age. I think they put as 82.
Oh right, yeah, down there for the representatives, right?
Yeah,
for the Parliament. Yeah.
I don't know if that includes head of state, but yeah, so they do have max age. I think 82 is probably a good age for now.
Yeah, how old is McCain? I think 5 years younger than what McCain is now is a good maximum age.
yeah, I know. I mean, McCain's still making decisions after brain surgery, so I don't know.
He might be the key vote, or lack thereof, this upcoming Supreme Court confirmation. It might be 50 to 49 because of him. I mean, if you can't make a vote because of that.
I know, exactly.
You should be impeached like normally.
Literally, if you cannot do your job because of whatever your affliction is, that should be a pretty clear indication that you should let someone else do the job. And I think that's the problem with Congress, is they get so comfortable, it creates a culture where that's okay. So if you are in a startup environment where everyone's busting their ass 20 hours a day and no one's sleeping because everyone else is looking over their shoulder at the guy next to them, well, that's going to be the culture. And if you have a Congress where the culture is, we take, this many weeks off every year, and they have tons of recesses. None of them really stay late for votes. There have been a couple, and it's only because they absolutely have to. And if you look at the voting records of a lot of these people, they're missing 20%, 30% of the votes sometimes. I mean, Marco Rubio missed an insane amount when he was running.
Yeah, an excuse of like, oh, I'm just running for president. I'm like, okay, that's a fine excuse. I mean, it's fine that you're doing that, but you can still vote at like 3 days a week during half the year, I think. And I'm fine with them not having I'm fine with them not working 40-hour work weeks, because I don't want them always conferring how to pass new laws to constrain our liberties and such. But I also, given that they have such a short period of time where they have to vote, just do it. It's not that big a deal. You're getting paid like $200,000 a year and free healthcare and all that stuff. So you're also like a delegate in the most esteemed body of the world. So just vote.
That's one thing I do like about this Constitution, is voting can take place from anywhere, and they make that specific, that representatives don't have to be there in the flesh to vote. Do you think that representatives in our Congress should be able to vote via a representative of theirs, because part of their staff is always there you could always have your chief of staff walk down and cast a vote for you. Do you think they should be able
Yeah.
to do that?
I like the idea of having decentralized voting. I don't think, if you're asking whether they can, I'm not sure. I don't think so, because I think
No,
yeah,
they
it has to be a
can't.
roll
They
call.
can't,
Yeah, they
but-
cannot.
but-
Yeah, but
do you think
should
they
they?
should
That would
be?
be a good idea. Yeah. I just, at what point are they, devolving onto the people with that they're paying instead of themselves?
Yeah.
And I did have a point about the electronic voting. I think it's a good idea to an extent, maybe if the actual delegates themselves are voting. But I think that at least now, how the internet exists now, if we were to say give people the right to vote online, that could pose a significant problem for the internet, because then net neutrality would have to be a thing, right? You'd have to make sure that nobody can limit or otherwise constrain somebody else's ability to access the internet, and it'd become a public utility and be regulated as such, and then kind of devolve into the same sort of standing that all government utilities have now. So I think that if there's a way to ensure that there's an internet that's outside of that kind of controllability, then definitely I'm for it.
Yeah, I mean, realistically though, you can always set up, a station with tablets or something for people who don't have internet, or there are a lot of ways I think to get around that. And most people, I mean, you can get an Obama phone at this point, which comes with cell service and cellular data. So I don't think anyone really is cut off from access from the internet. And frankly, I feel like the government is already willing to give every citizen a phone, essentially. So it's not going to cut that deep into their margins.
Yeah, exactly. And given the use of that, I think that's definitely a fair point. I mean, it's going to happen eventually, regardless of the congressmen now and the Supreme Court now. It's going to happen eventually that all these things become public utilities. And it's arguably like they should. I want to be a libertarian, but something else says, okay, in the future, it's going to be, you have to have the internet to be able to live in some senses, regardless of how true that was now, or how true that is now, or how true it was in the past. It doesn't matter. So I think that, especially with something where you have the entire population in low Earth orbit, or at least a significant portion of it, then yeah, I think internet should be right for all. But getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. So I mean, that's, I guess, getting into a little bit, we can talk about some of their economics. They've tied in blockchain in a lot of places, which I think is cool. And they talk about their own currency, which they call solar. So it says, solar shall be issued by the National Bank of Asgardia, and the amount tied to the parameters of the moon, the sun, and other celestial bodies set by a special law of Asgardia. The National Bank of Asgardia shall be a lender of last resort. The National Bank of Asgardia shall be responsible for the exchange rate, emission, and financial circulation, stability of the national currency, and liquidity of the banking system. So they're setting up a national bank. They're saying it's only to be used as a last resort, but anyone who's ever set up a national bank knows that that's not usually how it ends up going.
Yeah, as long as it says resort, they don't care what adjective you put in there. It's a resort. You can always make something appear to be the last resort.
Oh, exactly. And it's never like we wait to use our resources until they're the last resort. And they also said, this was an interesting caveat, it says, Asgardia shall recognize the immunity of commercial secrets and bank secrecy. So I didn't
so like
really...
copyright law?
Well, so commercial secrets, I think they're just saying, like IP and things like that. So there's a reason why no one knows the recipe for Coke. That's Coke's most valuable IP. It's kept under lock and key in some warehouse. Some people have reverse engineered it, to the point where they're somewhat close, but no one has it on the dot. So I think that's what they're saying. But bank secrecy is another thing. So I don't know if they're saying that banks don't have to disclose any information on their customers to anyone, which would be sort of like a Swiss system. And I think that would be a good idea. It's good to keep government out of people's money, just generally. But I don't think that's what they were trying to say. I think they were essentially trying to say that the banks don't have to be transparent.
Yeah, because that seems to me like it's a backdoor for concealing accounts that are like laundering money or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and this could be the greatest money laundering business that's ever been created. I mean, these are Russian guys. They might just be trying to avoid sanctions, so they're going to funnel billions of dollars through this independent nation that's not under under any sort of
Yeah, I swear to God, like purview or control of sort of an Earth state. I swear if I see this on some sort of indictment, like, oh, this is Trump's connection to the Russians, he's trying to turn the U.S. into a space force. It's
I mean,
I'll be like, damn, sign me up. I mean,
yeah, honestly, I wouldn't mind. I mean, so would you ever just bounce off of Earth and live on some sort of floating space station?
right now, unhesitantly, I'd say yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it depend like how far along, and if we get to travel to other places, if we can do it safely, like if it's Star Trek style, that seems pretty cool. I feel like that would be worth whatever risk you're taking, and it's a chance to do something new, something interesting, especially if
yeah.
you get to organize everything from the ground up. So depending on how much input I would get to have and how things get set up and how things function, but I think it is an interesting thought experiment just because you have to think about what you're actually trying to get out of existence. So, are you trying to explore, discover new things, contribute to society? Because if that is the case, then you would have to go because that's going to be by far probably the most you can discover, the most new information that you can help process. It's like being an explorer. Those guys contributed more to the global, I guess, global progress generally, than almost anyone who stayed behind in, Spain or Portugal or London or wherever.
Right. And when we say progress, I assume we're talking about like liberating people from destitution, not the kind of progress that's associated with the word now, right?
No, yeah, I would say just human progress in general. It's a sort of, I don't know if I would call it a
Of
manifest
mankind.
destiny, but uniting people, which to unite people first, typically there is conflict. But bringing people together, creating a stronger society, a stronger unitary body as a result, and we're working together on a grander scale than ever before, and that's pretty clear by our economy. I mean, if you look at GDP, it just keeps going up just because we're finding better and more efficient ways to work together and trade materials. So the more we can...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the more we optimize our ability to do that, and you're going to have businesses in space mining asteroids. They say, one asteroid could be worth $1 trillion based on the minerals inside. So we're going to have access to an entirely new market of sorts where we can bring things back, create things that'll better society as a whole, but also create a new age of enlightenment where we're discovering new things in space, we're discovering different phenomenon, we're seeing it in person, we're looking at things with a new perspective. And I think that generally will unite a lot of people, which I think is what Asgardia generally is trying to do. And I think, Ronald Reagan famously said, if aliens were attacked tomorrow, it's funny how quickly we'd forget about all these little problems we're having with each other.
I do agree with that sentiment completely. I think that we would have no idea what it'd be like. Like, oh, we won't just forget the Syrian conflict. I mean, yeah, it won't exist anymore because everybody will be concerned about either going crazy. I don't think that would happen either. I think everybody would be sobered and say, okay, well, we're part of something else now. And actually, it's funny you brought up the asteroid. That's the point I was about to go into. Was just that's when I think is going to be the next leap that's required because we just don't have the resources to be able to sustain any sort of habitations outside of Earth's immediate vicinity. Even on the moon, really, like getting stuff to the moon is extremely expensive. But if we can have, because there's a lot of asteroids around us all the time, and a lot of them pass by us just unnoticed. And so if we can just somehow find a way to track them down and reliably extract water and ice and minerals from them, even if it has adverse effects for the economy and the valuation of minerals here, that stuff just pales in comparison to the door that's open. And I really do think that manifest destiny is kind of the right term to use because that's like even this is something I agree with Marx is that the human condition is labor in a sense. It is we just want to build things and work. And if we see a frontier out there, it should be the natural conclusion that we should endeavor to explore it and colonize it and spread as far as we can. I mean, talk about a way to solve the problem of climate change, just leave Earth, right?
Yeah.
Go into orbit.
Yeah, I mean, and to deconstruct a little bit of what you said, you said it's really expensive to go to the moon. Well, what does expensive mean? Expensive just means this is how this is the ratio of resources it costs in exchange for essentially hiring the people with the expertise to do something. So, it costs $1 million because we only have this many, people with aeronautics degrees and this many engineers and, so on and so forth. But the more you get people interested in these things and the more collectively people move from a focus on building, the next little box that talks to you and orders you crap from Amazon, and move towards, because right now all the smartest engineers in Silicon Valley are, they're at Tinder trying to figure out how to get you laid, or they're at,
Apple
wherever
making a
else.
HomePod.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, brilliant friends at Apple, and they're literally just playing around with little settings. And it's like, once you get all that collective talent focused on something like space, and you prove to people that it can work, and you get people who are so excited that they're volunteering their time. I mean, you can move mountains incredibly quick, and that's something a lot of people don't take into account when they talk about things being impossible or too expensive. Or, I've seen some people talk about how, like, the amount of money it would take to do X is more than the entire GDP of the world or something. And it's like, that means nothing. Like, what you said is garbage, because essentially all you're talking about is the number of people willing to work on something in exchange for whatever you're giving them. And if you're giving them money, then so be it. But if you're giving them something that's going to encourage them to pursue sort of superordinate goals, which is what Elon Musk is always doing. He's always reaching for that next plateau, that next mountain, the next highest peak. And there are a lot of people who will work for free, and they'll work much harder, or they'll work for, a decent wage, but much harder than someone who's just working, because they're trying to make money. So harnessing that collective energy of people can be a really powerful thing. And I think that's very doable. And we're going to see in the next 50 years a lot of people realizing that, I think, and realizing that they're the ones deciding what's important in the world, and they're making that decision based on what's important to them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to hit on your point about the skepticism, I'm thinking of one skeptic in particular, and he's somebody you wouldn't even think would be a skeptic of this, but Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
And I've seen videos of him talking about SpaceX, and he's like, oh, all the space race is done by the government, which is a true fact, right?
Yeah.
Of course it's true. But he says, like, that's only governments can accomplish space, right? Elon Musk doesn't count because he's not doing it for a profit. His goal is to achieve something else. I'm like, well, that you don't get to like change the definition of capitalism to apply it to your example there. It's like, obviously we need skeptics and critics to tether people to reality, but we don't want people being tethered literally to the earth when they're trying to like get off and save humanity, as is Elon Musk's words, or help the society save itself. So,
yeah, I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson also thinks he can just unplug any AI.
I'll just unplug it.
Yeah, it's
Sam
like,
Harris is
do you not
I
understand
don't
how
think
like
you're listening to me.
Bluetooth works, or like, I mean, that thing could be beaming itself around the room while you're sitting there trying to figure out how to unplug the thing. Like,
Sam Harris is like, oh, can you unplug the internet? And he says, oh, that doesn't count. That's not the same thing. I'm like, what? Okay, Sam. All right, Neil deGrasse. I feel so bad I don't feel bad. It's more like I'm kind of sorry that Neil deGrasse Tyson was ruined for me. I mean, I ruined him by just watching extra videos of him when he's actually talking to scientists. But again, I digress. I think.
But at the same time, how many people has he gotten excited about science that went on to go do real science and get engineering degrees and go work for Elon Musk?
Completely fair. Completely fair. Yeah.
I think the problem is he masquerades as an expert in a lot of areas where he's not.
Yeah, but
really, it only takes a few really charismatic people to get everyone excited about something like that. So the more people like that we have, and the more projects we have where people can show their willingness to go along, the better. But let's dive into some more specific parts of how they're, sort of structuring it and how we might structure it differently. Let's see. One thing they talked about was education. So they said, the views of people and Asgardian citizens about human dignity shall be formed and fostered through education, parenting, propaganda, and the media in accordance with Asgardia's supreme values. That sort of sounds like something North Korea would put in their constitution.
Yeah, as soon as I heard dignity, I was like, "Boy, alarms going off." You know?
Yeah. Also, Asgardia's supreme values. Okay, supreme leader.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I didn't even think about it. Yeah, supreme leader.
Like the
Russian.
supreme values, they supersede all other values.
Yeah, this idea of human. I mean, I know this sounds like something nitpicky semantics, but the idea of about human dignity, if that's what I mean, that's also present in the EU Charter and I think the UN Declaration of Rights of Man, or not.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a French one, but. The dignity is not something that is that graspable by the multitude. It's not something that everybody would agree on. And dignity also means that, oh, if somebody has hate speech, then you can censor him or her because it's indignified. So I don't know what you think about that, but I think dignity itself is kind of a malicious word.
The problem we're having with our own constitution is that words are vague and words change in meaning, so you have to be as specific as possible, and it seems like they're being as general as possible so they don't piss people off in the beginning, but that's going to come and bite them in the ass later. I mean, they say the government shall encourage the work of citizen associations, etc., to engage in socially important activities. Who determines what is socially important and what does government encouraging people mean? Does that mean you're going to a labor camp unless you go to the next, march? What does that mean? And that's where things get really scary, is the wrong person can twist these things into whatever they would want. Asgardia is a nation of social justice.
Yikes.
Which strives
Spiritual benefits.
to enjoy material and spiritual benefits expected by other citizens, society, and the government, and produced by the citizens through labor and production of material and immaterial goods.
Yeah, and even the next one, this is just it seems to me a contradiction. Fairness in Asgardia shall be ensured through respect for the legal interests of all lawful interest groups. So... But can't you just pass a law and say that interest group isn't lawful anymore?
Yeah, right.
And one of the biggest, and this is kind of skippy. Actually, I'll wait to comment on this later before we get into something else because I don't want to tangentialize too much. So I'm going to continue on this fairness article.
Yeah.
And equality. Yeah. Wow. Any propaganda of superiority is prohibited. Okay. So what about the supreme values?
Well, I guess they're just saying no. I mean, that's good in a way. They're saying no one collective group can say that they're better than the others or promote a society focused on their values. But it just has to be. It can't be selectively enforced. That's the problem.
Exactly.
And you can already tell. They're specifically including the words racist, Nazi, and fascist, which I don't know if that's.
Yeah, Nazi in their new forms. Okay,
I mean,
it's historical and new forms, so they get to judge what's a new form of Nazism. So,
yeah, no, I mean, obviously, those are obviously ones that you would include as being there, but it seems like they're trying to appeal to people who are used to seeing those three words. And
a constitution doesn't need to have this in there, and I know it shouldn't go without saying that you don't want to be Nazi. I mean, you should always reinforce the idea that you don't want to have Nazi propaganda littering the streets, but. There's a different way to say that without specifically mentioning subsets of a group, because then those are the ones that are considered. And maybe if you have a mural depicting like a really skinny white lady who doesn't have maybe she's in a bikini, and some fat rights groups come and say that's propaganda that's disparaging us. Can't they get that banned? I know that was an issue in Australia. It really was. Like people were trying to ban. It was a giant mural ad on the side of a building, and it was depicting this blonde white lady in workout clothes, and somebody appealed to the government and said that it was discriminatory against fat people. And I mean, come on, really?
but that's the thing, is it? It depends who you ask,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's all of it is subjective. All of it is about feelings, and that's why I don't think you can have anything about feelings or subjectivity in a constitution. It has to be cut and dry. It has to be things you can measure. It can't just be something that you hope someone is being honest about. And everyone's threshold for things is different. Everyone's pain tolerance is different for physical pain. But within our laws, it doesn't matter, what your pain tolerance is if someone shoots you in the leg, it's going to be the same if they shoot me in the leg or they shoot, my girlfriend in the leg.
Yeah. Equal
but
dignity.
Yeah, but that's the thing, it should be, you should have some sort of baseline or some sort of universal that you're trying to abide by.
Yeah, and I would be fine if this was specifically an immunity against the government, as if, or prohibition aimed at the government. Like, the government of Asgardia shall not, or I guess it'd be the kingdom, shall not put forward any propaganda of superiority. So that would be a really good, thing to delimit that section and say that it's not applying to the citizens, so that the citizens can't have thoughts that are maybe thoughts of superiority or thoughts of any sort of thought, right? Because that can be bent and contorted to wrap around any right that you have. That's why, I mean, I've tried writing just as a kind of an experiment. I've tried writing my own constitution, and once I started, I was like, this is actually really hard. And it makes you kind of respect the founding fathers, because writing one as the Constitution today appears is extremely difficult, because you have to make sure that nothing can be contorted around itself to ignore an entire half the population, as it did, even though it was so good, as it did apply to slavery in the first century of our existence as a country.
Yeah, and I mean, it's clear in the fact that our nation is still around, and pretty much every other nation has adopted, some version of ours since, with, the exclusion of a few. But most of those that do, and, you can look at Japan, they're doing great now as a result, because if you use the right framework to operate under, if everyone abides by the same rules that generally works within a system of some sort of society, usually it's pretty applicable elsewhere. So the only things you have to watch out for is contradicting cultures. But for the most part, everyone wants the same things. The same incentives generally work on the same people or different people. And so, a lot of it can be copy pasted, which is why sometimes to me it's confusing that people want to add more. They want to reiterate, or they want to, I guess, reinvent the wheel by adding more specificity, when in fact it's making it worse. You're just adding restrictions that can tilt the whole thing out of balance.
I could not agree more. Yeah, because it's so fun to write them. You're like, oh, the government shall seek to, the government shall protect. Yeah. This shall be happening at some point.
And it's a mandate. What easier way to do something than mandate it? It's just, but that's the lazy way to do it. The smartest people have to create a system where all parties involved are agreeing to the contract, which is the opposite of government. Government is not really opt-in. You opt in by being born or moving somewhere. But it's not that easy to move away, not that easy to get citizenship somewhere else. So, the people that create business strategies are creating contracts where everyone wins in a situation, and that's what you want. You want the most people to win the most amount of time, because the more people do things willingly, the better society is going to function, the less friction.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we are picking at little word patterns and semantics in here and trying to criticize them, but that's also extremely important. Like, the difference between should and shall is huge in legalese. So, like, social protection shall be provided. I mean, that's a mandate on the government. That means they must provide social protection. But what does that even mean, right? You just eliminate that whole article.
You have to define that first, yeah.
Yeah, but I like getting into stuff about like security and protection against space originating threats. I think that's really cool, because we're gonna have to deal with it sometime. I mean, at some point in the future, assuming we're still around, and I think we will be for a long time, there's going to be the threat of asteroids and comet impacts and space and solar flares and cosmic rays and stuff coming from distant stars that just could wipe us out in a second. And so I think that even the idea of a space force is not even something that has to be in low Earth orbit, I think. But this is, of course, the extension of that and extrapolation of it. So it's definitely a good idea to have something like this.
I mean, in a lot of ways, Asgardia could be like the park rangers of space. They could be out there kind of keeping an eye on things, doing research. I think that would be the best case. I think if they try and move in a direction where they're going more into military technology and any sort of weaponization is probably not going to end very well for them, because no one likes the idea of some giant space station above them ready to rain down missiles if they get pissed off.
Definitely not. Or even if something just falls down. It could just,
and frankly, it's a waste of money too, because you're talking about essentially a country with no history. Well, a country with no history has no one that it's pissed off, no pre-existing, conflicts. We're not getting in a ton of conflicts anymore that are really necessary and that would really be there if we didn't just all have to work together in certain places. And Asgardia could be in a place where it's not necessarily bound by those things. I guess, I guess what I'm trying to say is, the new kid on the block usually has the most people trying to woo them and win them over, so they're gonna have a lot of opportunities to make deals with different countries, help with trade, things like that. And I don't think they need to be any sort of military organization. I don't really think they would even need a military, especially if it's composed of citizens from different Earth countries, so that every country has sort of a stake, especially if those citizens stayed dual citizens. So then, no country wants to kill significant amounts of its own citizens in most cases.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. I mean, currently, I think protection and military conflict are just built so much into the human condition, and so it has to be built into every government on the face of the planet, right? So if U.S. cut its military spending and slashed it to the point where there's a significant chunk taken out, then Russia and China would immediately be the top two in the world with nobody near them, and the world could devolve into chaos. But if moving outside of the U.S., if we could, instead of sending or outsourcing our conflict into space and making the Earth a safe place, you could flip that around and found a new government in space that doesn't have to take into account all this defense and aggression, even though it still should, right? It still should have defense capabilities, because if something's orbiting in space and let's say somebody on Earth even attacks it with just a missile, that could cause a catastrophic chain reaction to the point where there'd be like tiny dust particles flying around the Earth at 20,000 miles an hour, and nobody would ever be able to leave Earth for another 15,000 years. So
yeah,
it definitely needs to have a protection in it, I think. But as for offensive capabilities, that's just a really fine line. And once that's crossed in space, it's kind of like Earth wars cubed to the power of 4.
Exactly. They want to position themselves as a country like Sweden or Norway or Finland or Denmark, countries where no one really has any problem with them for the most part. They're contributing to the broader society. And to go back to, talking about designing missiles and so on and so forth, I mean, you think about how much time and energy and, essentially collective human effort has gone into designing tubes with a bunch of explosives in it to go level some shit that someone else is going to go have to rebuild as a result. And just doing that back and forth, it's an enormous amount of human potential wasted in just blowing shit up back and forth. And as soon as you have an industry, built around this incentive of, well, the more missiles you use, the more money our company makes by selling you, essentially a bigger supply of them, the more our incentive is to make sure that no one gets along. And the bigger that industry becomes and the less people get along, the more power they have as the intermediary between them all. And I don't think that's a path worth going down again.
Certainly not. And with the capabilities that one would have to achieve to get to space, I mean, it'd just be catastrophic. All you need is somebody to secede from Asgardia, and there'd be a civil war, and then everybody dies.
Yeah,
or flourishes forever. It's
and that's the thing.
sides.
In space too, literally anything goes wrong, you die anyway. So why create the possibility for more things to go wrong?
Yeah, just even the act of firing something in space means that exact force is applied to you. When you shoot a bullet, that force is applied to you and moves you backwards, and it's to a much greater extent in space because you have inertia that's not affected by the gravity of the Earth as it would be if you're on the surface. And so everything has to be rethought up in transportation and all these things like docking and mining. Everything has to be thought with a different framework than on a framework where you have an atmosphere and Earth gravity. So I think that the complexity of all these details would, at the very least, stave off conflict in space-originated conflict for a long time, to the point where people might just assume that peace is the current status, and the status will always be.
So, one thing I guess I'm wondering is, do you think people will, I think they want people to treat Asgardia eventually more like a primary primary citizenship. So do you think they have to get to the point where people are physically removed from their countries, where they have their own some sort of haven where people can go before anyone really takes it seriously? Do you think it can offer anything to people before that's the case? So is there any sort of loophole maybe where if I'm a citizen of Asgardia, then I technically can flee to some, to international waters or something and not be able to get extradited? Or do you think people will find ways to use this to their advantage, or you think it'll be a while until other countries even come close to recognizing it and it's just treated as a farce?
Oh yeah, I mean I think even now it's going to be treated as a farce for a long time, because the idea of having the dual citizenship thing, I'm not really that great on how this is legally, but I think that you can only have dual citizenship if you were born in one country to parents from another country, right? I think you can't just adopt another citizenship without renouncing yours, right?
Yeah,
but you have to renounce it, don't you?
Not necessarily. I think it depends on the country. There's certain countries.
But something like this, let's say I shoot somebody in the United States and I claim Asgardian citizenship and get extradited. That's not fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that it would necessitate people being full citizens, like prime citizens of Asgardia, and actually going into orbit and working there in order for it to get off the ground, both figuratively and literally. You can't have people that are just halving it in between, where I'll just take the benefits of Asgardian citizenship and then also the benefits of being a citizenship of an Earth state. So I think it would have to be a one or the other kind of deal at the beginning to get people to have a legitimate interest, and maybe even get governments to be wary of people just abandoning and renouncing citizenships in mass.
And that being said, I mean, you're going to have a hard time raising any sort of tax revenue until people feel like they're actually getting something from that citizenship. And if you're not getting a place where you can live on the planet that you're on, you're probably not as likely to want to give some central government a bunch of your money. So, I wonder if they're going to be able to self-fund to the point where they have a place like that where people feel like that trade-off is worth it.
I hope so. I mean, because given all this language in this constitution, you would need a 60% tax eventually. Maybe not even that far into the future if you want all this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
oh yeah. This stuff
so many
isn't
guarantees
cheap.
And shalls
yeah.
and mandates.
Exactly. Where's the CBO report? That's what I like
exactly.
to see.
Yeah. This should be the Article 1. Yeah.
Yeah.
Geez, a lot of articles in here. It's way longer than our Constitution, I think.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
But it's really detailed.
I didn't see anything about, drug use or prostitution. So I'm wondering where some of those questions would be answered.
Probably just in the rights, and then because it sees key rights and freedoms. See the list of them there, but those aren't fundamental rights. There's a huge difference between you shall have the right to versus Congress can pass no law abridging. That's so different. And this, I'm kind of disheartened to see that they didn't pick that up here. I mean, they definitely said inalienable when they talk about obligations. An inalienable, indispensable obligation. That's pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
In Article 9. But they're talking about the rights in here. So about the drugs, I haven't seen anything either. It would depend on whether there's some clause about the rights that are not currently present being reserved to the people rather than reserved to the state. So it seems but in space, I don't know. And this is, I want drugs to be illegal here, but in space, if somebody smokes meth, and crashes a satellite, that's not good for anybody.
That's a good point. But at the same time, let's say we use the example of the Native American church. Could you, if you were in the U.S., then say, as a citizen of Asgardia, it is our belief that you can use this synthetic chemical that they've created, up in upper Earth orbit.
That's so hard. That's such a hard contradiction, and especially I don't even think it should be reserved to. I think that whole religious thing gets misinterpreted incorrectly by even people that think that interpret it so they can have more religious freedom. Because you can't really use that as a claim to be privileged to have rights that other people don't have. There's a difference between having your rights disparaged because of your religion and having new rights conferred upon you that aren't conferred upon anybody else.
Well, I mean, in the case of the Native American church, the government is taking away the people's right to use peyote, and so their right to religion is essentially, what's the word? Unabridged, or it's
Like,
being
plenary, as in it's being abridged, or it's
being abridged.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
So
by
I think that
the fact that it's become that they've made their sacrament illegal.
wait, can you extend that to like human sacrifice? Because it's the same. It's the same fundamental question, right? It's even though it's a widely different law, it's just kind of like where you have to draw the line somewhere. But I think it's a fair assertion to just say, like, instead of outright prohibition, just have a court that draws the line when the cases come to it, like individual cases.
Well, I'd say, I mean, it really comes down to how much you abridge someone else's freedom as a result of your abridgment of the law. So if you're sacrificing other humans, then, by definition, you're encroaching on someone else's freedom. But if you're not, then I think it's a hard argument against it.
And I completely agree. I think in this specific example about peyote and about drugs in general, I say defer to the non-prohibition of drugs and say, okay, let's just, if that's a conflict that we maybe predict that's happening in the future, just don't prohibit drugs, and maybe if you're working on Asgardian fleets or something like that, then you have drug tests, and maybe it's in the rules there that if you're hired by the government, you can't be on drugs. But if you're just floating in your satellite and you want a puff, then it shouldn't be too big of an issue.
What happened to the era of just personal responsibility? There was a time when it wasn't that you had to be told not to, drive when you were super hammered, or, that it wasn't illegal to drive drunk the first so many years of the automobile. And, as society progresses, it seems we punish all of the people who can take care of themselves because of the people who can't. But at one point, do you just, let survival of the fittest take over? If you're the guy who wants to do meth in space, maybe for one, that's not the guy you should have let go up into space. That's probably not the guy.
He's slurring his words like while he's getting on the rocket.
Probably not one of your first astronauts you want to send up there.
Just deport him, right?
Yeah.
Have like ice, but for space.
But that's the thing. It's so hard to blanket state anything or anyone, because there's so many people who can responsibly use drugs, and so many people who really can't. There are tons of people who can't responsibly use food. Look at the obesity epidemic in the United States. So it's, at what point do you just expect the bare minimum from people and, let the cards fall where they will?
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the way this is framed too, I think it's that you hit on a good point there. It's about the fact that it's everybody. It's a really diverse selection. It's always going to be, by definition, diverse, which is a good thing. You would want a proportional or even exceedingly proportional representation of the Earth's citizens in order to bring the best aspects of all the best cultures from Earth and kind of excel into the manifest destiny of space. And I think it's good to set up a government that kind of gives more powers to itself at the beginning, kind of like how that was the fundamental problem with the U.S. government at first and a lot of governments. But I mean, you see how that turns out when you have this enshrined into the Constitution, is that even the slightest little blip that favors the government gets expanded into a giant hole in the future, as we have now. So
yeah,
if you start from a hole, then what's it going to be? It's going to be like a sinkhole later, to use that example. But also another thing is, when they're amending the Constitution, that it doesn't say that you need like a specific supermajority. It just says that you have to somebody has to propose it, and then the citizens of Asgardia vote on it by a referendum. And when you don't include the specific majority, then it's assumed to be 50% plus one. Yeah. So you could just, instead of voting for laws, just change the Constitution every day.
Political action committees are going to be going nonstop.
Yeah, exactly. You have a Citizens United case for the space, that wouldn't be good.
Yeah, you're going to be seeing ads every day promoting some radical position that they can convince half the population to do overnight.
Martian lives matter. Yeah, it's like...
yeah, and but at the same time, could a government that is that responsive be effective? So what if it was the case where, through really intelligent development of the infrastructure with, crypto and blockchain, and I'm not just saying that just because, like, if, the one thing government does really well is distribute large amounts of money to large numbers of people, and it doesn't really even do that well. But theoretically, it should be able to do that, right? Yeah. So say all of their payments are in solar, and that's some sort of cryptocurrency. Then on, May the 1st, they decide that everyone should, the like average universal basic income should be $1,000 a person, and then the next month uh, they go in and they decide that wasn't enough. We're going to go to $2,000. And then they realize that's too much, which they would never really do, but theoretically, and they go back to 1,500. So you could A/B test policies in real time, and people could react in real time. Do you think that's something that could ever work, or do you think it's good that it's slow and it needs to continue being done that way?
I think it's in the current framework. I think it's good that it's slow, but in the framework as we're talking about for Asgardia, I can't really say. I'm kind of. I think that what Asgardia is, respective to what you're just saying, is a middle of the road option between full libertarianism or full like freedom from government, as actually, and the other side being full not tyranny, but maybe like fascism, full order, that you need to have a state that's huge that manages everything in order for you to have something as endeavoring as going to space and orbiting the Earth and having society that resides there. So
Yeah.
I think that if you were to go all the way to the right and have just established order and the state controls everything and is part of everybody's lives and everybody acknowledges that the state is the holiest thing, you might honestly need that. And in that event, then UBI probably would be a good thing, as if the citizens were in some sort of participation and they had a mechanism and that made sure it didn't go too high or too low, and that it could go lower if it needed to. And it's not like every time you enact a new basic income level, it just raises the floor that you're allowed to have. And I think that's the problem with government now, is that every time you have a new entitlement program, it's always the floor that rises up. It's never drops back down.
Yeah, and the idea of universal basic income in space kind of sounds funny to me, because how many things are you really buying if you're in space? Are you really conducting a ton of business with Earth? Or generally, do you probably have what you need? I imagine it functioning more like being in the Navy, where you're on a ship, everyone's got the same quarters, and day to day you're not focused on making money because you're so much more focused on being a part of this collective with your own responsibilities, your own hierarchy, yeah, your own chain of command, your own social circles. So what matters isn't just materialism on those ships. What matters is being the most useful part of this machine, and people get a lot of satisfaction out of doing that. Probably a lot more so in a lot more cases than people working for money. I mean, you hear soldiers all the time come back, one, missing the adrenaline, and two, missing the community that they had, because really all we're striving to do is become part of a community, become some part that matters, of some part of society, some part of a club, some part of your classroom, some part of your job or your office, or whatever it is. You want to succeed in some sort of natural hierarchy, and that can be enough. That can be more than you need. So, yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying, do you think people are going to need basic income, or, do you think it'll move more towards just a society based on hierarchy and respect and, I guess, just goodwill, really?
It's a good position to oppose. I think that, I think it'd be better to have like something like universal basic resources or something like that, because you made me think. I mean, do I really need a space Kroger? If I'm,
you
if
need that 4K space
yeah.
TV, and you need the 6K one next year, right?
I think, like, going back to what you're just saying about it being kind of like a thing that you do to aspire for greater humanity and progress in space, that kind of progress manifests destiny. It kind of reminds me of the kind of mindset I have when I read about the American Revolution and the Constitutional Convention. It's like, I really would love to have been a part of that. I mean, it just sounds so cool, the mythology that's around it. You almost just want to go and, man, I wish I could be there and just witness what they're doing. But you could be, this could be like the enlivening spark that Asgardia would need to get off the ground, is that idea, that calling forth that you get to be a part of something bigger. And so you might have to sacrifice your 50 different brands of sunglasses and your really nice car that happens to run over a rock and get totaled every once in a while. That's something that you give up if you want to go to space and work for something greater. So to answer your question, I think, universal basic resources, it sounds fine to me given that constraint and scenario.
And there are so many people that are willing to give up everything to do something that they think is important. I mean, almost everyone going into the military is going because they want to fight for their country, and you know, at the end of the day, they're not getting paid very well. They're getting shot at. They're not sleeping much. You know, these are very demanding jobs that if you just looked at them on paper, you'd say no rational person would ever want to do this. And yet you have millions of people who love the life that they're living. And so there are a lot of people who are, I think, willing to put aside some of the traditional benchmarks and goals that people seem drawn towards in life in pursuit of something greater. And a lot of people are starting to realize earlier on than before that they can get all the things that they've been told that they want and still not be happy or satisfied. And with the internet, more people are able to communicate that feeling across larger cultural differences, larger geographical differences, and say, hey, you know, I've got $10 million and a Ferrari, and guess what? I'm still not happy. And they can see the guy who's off backpacking in Thailand and say, damn, that guy's happy. He's exploring. He's seeing new things. He's learning about the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's kind of like, to hit on your point about driving a Ferrari, yeah, it's this whole state that we live in now, the society where everything's so advanced and so nice and ease of life is essentially fully achieved in most places, or not most places, but significant areas in the world. To borrow the words of Peterson, I mean, we've been fed this diet of rights and freedoms without commensurate responsibilities, and something that would be this this earth shattering or whatever, this shattering as going up to space and having to build something external to the earth and have just every sort of, you know, freedom and license completely revoked from how we currently see them and just reshifted and recontextualized. I think that's such a good idea for society to progress forward. It needs to happen at some point where we just shake ourselves and like look in the mirror and say, you know, what responsibility do I have right now? What am I getting? What do I have to do in response to all this good stuff around me? You know, you almost get into that feeling that we deserve everything as it is now. I mean, we definitely don't deserve everything that we have that's just given to us. We don't deserve it because we don't work for it. I mean, it's nice that we have it, but we would need to work for it in space, and that could teach a new generation some really good values.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. So I wanted to get your take on how you would want a legal system set up. Do you think there's any room for improvement on the U.S. legal system? Do you think there would be ways to avoid some of the things that have happened in our own legal system? So, you know, what's happening with Rosenstein and Lynch and Comey and all of these people. Are there ways to protect against groups acting against, you know, the whole and essentially colluding for their own purposes?
Yeah.
Or, well,
I think like, yeah, I mean, it's a broad question.
I was going to say allegedly colluding.
Yeah, exactly. Allegedly. You know, of course, there can be a whole podcast where we just say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a broad question, but I think I can definitely answer parts of that. It's like, I think it starts with civics education. I don't know about you, but I went to private school in my life, and I didn't even have civics until I was in high school, and then in college when I took some government classes, and now I'm in political science. But
yeah.
I didn't have any civics education that taught me the importance of our institutions and that everything should be free from bias, and just that was so. It was so disheartening to watch that Peter Strzok hearing. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. Just because only people who know how the process should work and who have respected institutions really will see that and just think, geez, like half the people on there don't know what the rules of their own committee are.
Yeah.
And that they don't know that Congress is like the first body, the first branch mentioned in the Constitution. It has the duty to investigate and oversee parts of the other branches of government. You know, every single court in the federal government, except for the Supreme Court, is regulated and created by Congress and by law. And so the fact that everybody can watch that and different people can have different interpretations of the same basic facts, I think that can be easily attenuated by having better civics education other than what we have now. And about the legal system, I'd just say maybe protections against Congress passing, or the Congress or the Parliament in Asgardia's case, just running rampant over people's running roughshod over people's personal liberties by enacting laws like the drug war and stuff like that. Because people decry the criminal justice problem now, where a lot of Black Americans are disproportionately imprisoned due to the really harsh penalties for drug laws and drug violations. But that doesn't happen you don't fix that by uprooting the entire justice system. You fix that by passing a law that repeals drug prohibitions. That's all it takes. And so, but then again, that goes
Or
back around.
mandatory minimums.
Exactly, yeah.
And the problem too, I think, is a lot of the people who are protesting don't understand, one, how these laws even came to be, because you look at so many of these laws and you trace back why they were put into place in the first place, and some of these, it's 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and you realize it was for some ridiculous reason that we would no longer care about now, and yet no one has gone back to fix it. So we do a really bad job of educating essentially kids about why laws are the way they are, and moreover, we tell them what to think but not how to think. So one thing that I really liked about my government class was we constantly had discussions and we constantly had debates, and so the teacher pit us against each other pretty frequently. But had it not been for me and pretty much one of my friends, there would have been no divergent opinion in that room. And I think you're seeing more and more of that as people are just less willing to take a divergent stance, and they're less willing to do so just because they don't know anything about it. They aren't paying attention. They don't care to pay attention. They don't know why it matters. And that's a huge problem. So you have a lot of people who are pissed off but don't really know why, and they don't know how to fix it, and they don't know why it's the case in the first place. But once you understand all these systems and how they work, it's not that hard to figure out how to address the issue, and yet very few, congressmen are looking at it in that way, and most of them have been there so long that they have a dog in the fight. It might have been one of their bills, and they don't want to essentially get humiliated the same way a lot of academics will double down on their research that's been disproven by a newer theory.
Or they won't publish it if they get the conclusions that differ from the hypotheses.
Yeah, exactly. So there's no emphasis on just learning for the sake of truth and for the sake of figuring things out to the betterment of all society. And so people have created this zero-sum game where it has to be you or me, and no one's figuring out how to create the perfect balance of you and me. So really that's all of the questions that have ever been asked about politics, for the most part, are about the fundamental question: how much do I owe to the rest of society and to other people, and how much does society owe to me, and how much do I owe essentially to myself?
Yeah.
But those questions, they aren't that complicated if you look at them objectively and you figure out ways where everyone can be a part of it without essentially losing any of their own freedoms.
I agree, and that kind of thing needs to be reinforced through education, not upper education, but at a young age. And this is where I kind of hesitate to grant the power to the state to enforce ethics and compel ethics classes, is because right now one of the biggest problems in America that's really going, at least from a right-wing perspective, that's going unnoticed, is the fact that the federal government subsidizes so many, universities almost fully, other than their endowment, and a lot of these humanities departments are promoting extreme leftist values that don't have anything to do with our traditional not meaning like moral or traditionally moral values, but traditional
and they're also just, they're not a benefit to society. All they're doing is causing problems.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not about prescribing any sort of future. It's about critical theory. You need to deconstruct this and see what its roots, and then apply your opinion to it. And that's what's causing, I think, a lot of civics education standards that really have nothing to do with the civics as we've had them traditionally. And I don't think if we have something in Asgardia where it specifically talks about the supremacy of Asgardian propaganda and their values, that if it were something that was compulsory in education, that could lead to just a doubling down of statist values. But that could be necessary in space. So that's something where I kind of leave my opinion at the door and kind of open myself up to maybe another opinion about government size.
Yeah, so what do you think about, public versus private education, in respect to Asgardia, in respect, US or wherever else, what's the balance? Because you have, on one hand, with private education, you have pretty much anything goes. So you can have a good majority of your population being schooled by, religious zealots or, whatever doctrine you can imagine. It could become a movement in which case more and more people are essentially indoctrinated. But at the same time, with public schools, you're assuming that all the information is unbiased, and what the state is telling you is what's actually important. And I think that's the most important distinction: is the state, even though it can be telling you truths, it's telling you the truths that some administrator has determined are the important ones that you should know. And I can't tell you how many times I learned about stuff that's absolutely useless that I really don't think I had to know, like cursive. And, there's a trade-off there, because then you're not learning about all of these other things, and more, even more scary is you think you've learned about everything that matters. And I think that's what you see with a lot of kids, a lot of these protesters, is they think they know everything about anything that matters, and they've created their own version of reality based on those facts. But they aren't realizing that there's usually a whole lot more to the story. And I don't know, how do you think you can get as much information across to a population's youth without tainting it with any sort of bias?
I think this might sound a little bit circular, but I think in order to free it from bias that might develop in the future, you need to taint it with bias at the beginning, which is why I think perhaps having education that's in a sort of Christian perspective or religious perspective — doesn't have to be Christian, obviously, but that's just what I grew up with and have learned to appreciate. With that, you get the idea that science itself isn't an end-all God. And I know that might sound ridiculous to some people, but at the end of the day, sometimes people do go a little too far with science. It leads to things like eugenics and genocide and just catastrophic predictions that never come true, and thus affect policy in adverse ways. So I think you need some limitation on reason in school. I know that sounds contradictory, but you definitely need it. And so just to be able to treat everything with skepticism, but not treating skepticism itself with skepticism, if that makes sense. As far as that applies to space, though, I don't really know how you could have a separate school system when resources are that constrained, unless we're talking about hundreds of years in the future where that's not an issue.
Yeah. I think there was something to be said back when they had apprenticeships and things like that. I think initially that's probably what would mostly focus on things like that, because you're going to have all these new and random skills and vocations, and very few people who know them. So you're going to need some sort of apprenticeship program where you're shadowing someone and learning, how to mine an asteroid, because how many people are doing that, But, eventually, like anything else, you're going to need to know some background just generally about things that matter. And also, I think more importantly, you're going to have to learn how to think, and you have to learn how to think logically, meticulously. I mean, one thing, I don't know if I would say I'm thankful for, but I feel like when I broke my hip snowboarding, I hit my head pretty hard, and ever since I used to have like almost a photographic memory, and ever since my memory has gotten much worse. But as a result, I've had to think through everything much more logically, so I can't just memorize the name of some process. I have to understand the process. So if we're talking about photosynthesis, no, that's not a good example. But whatever it is, whatever I'm thinking about, whether it be economics or that was one problem I had in economics, is they constantly wanted us to draw all the graphs, and they wanted us to just. Most of my friends were memorizing how you move the curves left and right based on different changes. Yeah, it was miserable. And a lot of kids just memorized it. It's super easy. I have a terrible problem with binary choices, so I can never remember if it's left or right based on X or Y input.
Right, some arbitrary factor.
Exactly. So I had to go through and literally learn everything about how all these curves are formed, why, and that's what most of the kids should have been doing, but I had to do it because I couldn't just memorize that. And you extrapolate that out to most things, you come to have a pretty complete understanding of how things work. I understand how to build a computer from scratch now. I understand, in pretty good detail about how you develop an app, because until you understand how to do it, you can't know if it can be done and what the limitations of it are, or what can be done that no one else is thinking about doing quite yet. You have to understand at a pretty basic level, and a lot of kids don't understand anything at that level, which is a big problem, because then you don't have the tools to create new knowledge.
Yeah, I think I love that example about economics and how you have to kind of understand the process. I think that can apply as well to cryptocurrency, because everybody uses so many acronyms.
Yeah.
It's like an alphabet soup of acronyms all the time, and so that's just I mean, that could be a litmus test to see if you know what they're talking about. But assuming it's not,
I feel like that's kind of the bullshit test of most jobs. Is in finance they have so many words that they throw out there, so many abbreviations, and they love to use them just because that's how you know that you're someone in the industry. But more than that, it makes people outside the industry feel like it's more complicated than it is. So my mom's financial advisor can't sit there and admit to me that the fact that I've made 50% in 2 weeks is juxtaposed with the fact that he's made 10% in 10 years. It's like you can't.
It's because of the ABC and the
yeah, exactly. Unless he throws out a bunch of big words right after that, that realization, you can't keep your clientele, but you can scare them into thinking, well, we're making sure we, we're doing this moving point average, and we're gonna diversify.
You gotta have flux, but you can't have change. And if you want change, you gotta do ABC again, and etc. But now it's gonna be 10% fee for you. So if I go in and get paid now, yeah. But I think that comes with applying the attorney and legalese to everything. Is that everything becomes just bogged down in language, and I don't see that not addressed obviously outright, but addressed at all within any clause in that Asgardian Constitution, preventing society from degenerating into just pointless battles. But on the other hand, it's not going to happen in space. I really can think that it will not happen up there. Half this Constitution is not necessary for Asgardia, I think.
Yeah, I mean, law. See, that's the thing. Think about, how many lawyers do you really want in Asgardia? Do you want the Constitution to require half your even 1/100th of your population to be, vocationally obliged to just interpret your founding documents? That's a complete waste of 1% of your population, that could be essentially working towards something more important. So there's a lot, by not setting something up right in the outset, you're wasting a lot of time down the line, because think about how many smart people have gone into law in the United States, and how many areas of that law is just interpreting the garbage that a lot of lobbyists and think tanks and staffers have thrown together in a desperate attempt at, midnight on the night before a vote just to get it through committee. And at the end of the day, and especially a lot of the bureaucratic organizations that then write in the specifics, they're creating lawyers at the same time too. So you have a bureaucracy that's hiring people for something that's pretty much unnecessary, and then you have people being hired in the private sector to interpret all of those things created by the bureaucracy, which is all gigantic waste of human potential, in my opinion.
And to contextualize it with an anecdotal example, I was watching. I love just watching Representative Trey Gowdy of South Carolina get on not really the stand, but kind of lecture administrators from his dais at Congress. And I was watching this video of him interrogating or conducting an investigation into some malpractice that was conducted by the DEA in 2015. And the administrator of the DEA, the top person of the DEA, was sitting there, and one of her field agents had been accused of soliciting prostitution from a might-be minor off in Cartagena while on DEA time. And Gowdy was saying, okay, did you fire this person? And she kept saying, oh, well, according to the handbook, I'm only allowed to recommend punishment in this situation. And he says, okay, what if some DEA agent murdered somebody in Cartagena? What would happen then? She said, well, I would have to consult with the rules of the administration. And I was like, are you kidding me? This is what happens when you have lawyers everywhere. It's that you can't have plain speak, because everybody's trying to say, I don't want to entrap myself. I want to make sure this doesn't contradict with why.
Exactly, yeah. It's just so many people wasting energy not being direct, and just generally speaking, so many people by not being direct with each other. And this is something I encourage you to try in your own life. Just try being direct with people, because you save so much time and just wasted stress and emotional energy, especially by trying to, beat around the bush and then trying to interpret what the other person is saying to you. And more often than not, you're creating miscommunication and making things much worse. And there have been so many cases, in my own life where I've misinterpreted something that someone has said, and all of a sudden, you're in a fight, and then maybe you lose touch with that person, you never talk to them again. And, how much time did you spend building up that relationship just to mess it up at the end?
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, that piece of advice is something that I could easily apply to mine after I've been trying to as well. It's just like it's so bad, it's so corruptive. It's such a corrupting agent to have that so much interpretation going on in everything people say. It's a really bad, and that's only accelerated and exacerbated by legalese and this notion that everything has to be this climate that we have in America where it's so divided. At least it's appeared to be so divided. The extremes are magnified to the point where you have to interpret every little grammatical folly in somebody else's argument. That's how you fell them, and not by taking their highest argument and working to build a consensus with somebody. And that's the aspiration, I think, of Asgardia that's most laudable, is that their number one goal is unity. And it's easy to kind of parade around those kind of words of unity and those really aspirational values. But it's one thing to just parade them around. It's another thing to kind of to work as this Russian billionaire is doing and trying to build some sort of consensus making machine. And that's all what we're about at Crypto Economy, right? Is consensus building.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're trying to do. And, been playing around with all sorts of stuff. We've been messing around with RepMe a little bit, and someday I'd love to personally build a better way for people to reach consensus and to vote and to get involved, because I think the more you crowdsource intelligence, the better, everything is going to be, and the more you reward activity, especially by citizens of a country. And, that calls into question if, the social credit score system of China is a good thing or a bad thing. If a government incentivizing its people to act a certain way is good or bad. And I think that largely depends on who's in charge of the government and who decides. But
that's
you
something
do
I'd
want
be fine with in space. Like if you have a really bad social credit, you can be deported back to Earth. I think because you might pose a much realer threat than somebody just in Texas.
And I think you could use that in space to entirely replace money too. So you get to the point where it's like, oh, thanks Will, he went out and repaired that gas line last night, so we're gonna give him an extra 10. Or he made dinner for the whole crew and it wasn't his turn, we'll give him an extra so and so. Or he missed his shift, we'll dock him this. So then you have a system where you can really quickly motivate large numbers of people to act in a certain way. So if your whole crew is at dinner, but you've got, some depressurization going on in the engineering department, you can say, you get a 10-point social credit boost if you go and fix this, and you just put that out, and then it creates a system where it's a free market and anyone can accept that call and go and do it and get rewarded as a result. So whatever that is and whatever that credit score earns you, whether it be a bigger bedroom or a fancier suit or more time off, I think you can make that work even better than a cash system in a lot of ways.
Definitely, it could be really good for, as you say, building incentives, so long as it doesn't devolve into something like, oh, John hit on Kathy in the workforce, we're gonna shoot him into the red spot of Jupiter now as punishment. That could be the problem when you have something like dignity mentioned so much in there, that he violated his dignity, already he's going to be deported into space and die. So
exactly, but at that point the society will collapse. So you'll get really quickly, you're going to get feedback on how it's functioning, and hopefully if it's developed in a way that's agile enough, you can reverse course if things aren't going your way, and you can do it a little more quickly than a less structured economy.
Right, and fair enough too about and especially when you have constraints and limitations on the government, you won't have the feedback won't be verbal feedback. It'll be actually like event-based feedback. Like the feedback will be, oh my gosh, that that sort of when you deported everybody because they're having microaggressions, that entire side of the space station just collapsed and disappeared. So
Yeah,
all right,
like
no
all
more
our
of that
engineers
activity.
are gone. Okay,
Oh, yeah,
that's
like,
a problem.
Okay, so all engineers have been sent to free
Yeah.
space. Okay, does somebody want to go change like the air filter before we all die? Okay,
Yeah.
we might not want to do that anymore, and that's something that couldn't really happen here because effects on an institutional level aren't felt for decades in the U.S. system, really.
Yeah.
And it would be felt within days up there. So it could end up being a utopia that's not one that's kind of like a Marxist vision, but just one that's a collective kind of blends every good aspect of every ideology, and that's also a utopian feature. But that it's not impossible, right? Utopia to people 200 years ago is what we have now. So a utopia relative to now could be true utopian bliss, at least until we advance past that.
Yeah, I think it really is just a balance between, I guess, coercion and motivation. So you don't want to create a dystopia where you're constantly so worried about the repercussions of your actions that you've always got, an eye over your shoulder. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just a balance that you have to walk, and you have to make sure that people are, I'm not sure how you would balance the carrot and the stick in that scenario. I guess this can maybe just be our last point, but what do you think are the best incentives and disincentives for behavior generally?
Oh man, just make sure that, and this is just sounding, I don't know how you prove this too, because I'm kicking the ball down the road, but just make sure that the right things are prohibited and the right things aren't prohibited. Or sorry, make sure that the wrong things aren't prohibited. That's maybe a better way of saying it. Is that you need to make sure that people are encouraged to work, but you don't also want to criminalize their goals either. That if somebody wants to work on behalf of some goal that they might have, or he or she might have individually, that you don't maybe outlaw marijuana in space. Because if I were in space, like I would love to go into space, provided that I could get there and come back safely. But if I'm up in space alone and I'm in the middle of like the asteroid field or something like that, like hundreds of billions of not billions, like tens of millions of miles away, I'm gonna get lonely probably, and I might want to have, or somebody else might want to have like a puff of a cigarette, right? You don't want to make sure that everything's too ordered and too restricted to the point where people can't even enjoy themselves. But on the flip side of that, you also want to, stuff shouldn't be so lax as to allow people to do anything. I think that is kind of the root of behavioral choices and behavioral action that kind of fells other societies that might be able to be provided for in space. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. What do you think would be some sort of structural incentives to allow people to enjoy their lives without devolving into chaos and libertinism?
Well, I think generally the best way to discourage behavior is social ostracism, and that's proven across the board and throughout time. So I don't think that's something that changes. People want to fit into a group. So the best way to, incentivize or de-incentivize behavior, I think, would be if you do, X, Y, or Z, then you are invited to the captain's ball. And if you don't, then you have to sit in your room while all your friends go have fun at their date night, And honestly, that sounds dumb, but boy, do you not want to be the one guy that isn't there, and you don't want everyone else to know why you're not there.
Ostracism works. Historically, it's been the one thing that has worked.
Yeah, and you know what? You correct for that behavior because you hate the way that felt, and so you change your behavior ultimately. And I think you can do that without being too cruel. So we take it to pretty insane extremes when you talk about solitary confinement. That's the most extreme form of social ostracism that you can really have.
Especially
a lot of those
space,
people oh yeah, a lot of those people might rather be in a labor camp because at least they're talking to people, at least they have some sort of community with the other miserable people, someone to confide in, someone to share their misery with. That's really the worst thing that you can do to someone. And the happiest people really are the ones with the biggest community, biggest communities and best support systems. So you always want to have a team helping you in whatever you're doing. So you want to build a team wherever you can, and you want to use that team to support you in the areas where you aren't as strong. And everyone throughout their lives, I think, is trying to build a team, but people have gotten worse and worse at it as, people have had to move away for college, and you're less likely to have time to build long-term relationships with a large number of people. And so people try and find that, at work or through, groups that are, protesting the government, or interest groups, or whatever it is that you care about. You typically try to find a community within those groups, and sometimes that can make people feel fulfilled. So
I agree, and I'll add one last point to that too about what I was saying earlier about the behavior. I think that also the knowledge and the confidence that the government is the same government for everybody, that people don't have contrasting views about the same government under which they operate as citizens. Especially when there's such a predictably diverse array of citizens that would compose the populace and the denizens of Asgardia. If everybody's confident that the government's treating everybody equally and that they know what to expect when they walk out into space and do a spacewalk and to fix something, that they're going to be treated equally by the government, under the government, then I think that also engenders a sense of patriotism that's different from the kind of patriotism you see in America when it goes to its extremes.
Yeah, I think you need to really be careful about selective enforcement of the law, because nothing diminishes people's faith in institutions like selective enforcement of the law. And within that, you could even, have something built in. You probably will not agree with this, but you could have something built in the Constitution where if some sort of decision is made, by a prosecutor, that a majority of the population can overturn the decision or something. So if they don't want to go after someone who's committed some crime, the people can force them to pursue it, and they're not forcing them to find them guilty, they're just forcing them to look into it. So there could be some
honestly, I think I would disagree with that face value as you predicted, but maybe if it was a supermajority, I don't really oppose that now that I think about it. Like, if you have a really bad Supreme Court decision, why not just give it back to the people and have that people be the ultimate check on themselves, right?
Yeah.
If you have like 3/4 of people who think vehemently disagree with a law or the interpretation of a law, then have the entire population overturn it. I'm definitely open to that. I think even in space, it'd be better if we have space judges running amok than just have the population vote on it electronically.
At the end of the day, those are the people who have to deal with it, and you want to get as much of their input as possible, because one thing I noticed in DC is everyone is literally just so out of touch. And they say that like it's obvious and people have gotten accustomed to that idea, but just being in different places, you're going to feel differently. You're going to jive with the culture in a certain way, and you're going to forget what life is like for other people. And more importantly, you're just going to stop talking to people who have a difference in opinion than you. And you're going to get far fewer opinions generally, far fewer perspectives, and you're going to take less and less of them into account. And I feel like a lot of people in DC have turned this into a game, and it's like high school essentially, where they're all jiving for a hierarchy within their community. You have, within each party, one person wants the speakership, and the next guy really wants to be whip, and you have these interpersonal dynamics within the parties, and everyone's jiving for a social hierarchy within them, and all that does is muddy the waters for all the people that are relying on them. And we just have to be aware that this is a sociological phenomenon. It's behavioral. We know it happens to people, and I don't think we should necessarily blame people when it happens to them, but we should blame them for, one, not paying attention, and we should design systems so that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, I would agree with that as 100%.
All right.
Yeah,
well,
that pretty much covered everything as Asgardia. I mean, hopefully they listen to this and edit
Yeah.
the Constitution down a bit.
So if you guys want to check out Asgardia, go to asgardia.space. Maybe Will and I will run for some positions, see if we can do a hostile takeover. But other than that, I want to thank you guys for listening. Thanks for tuning in and sticking around while we've been doing some prototyping. We're going to get you guys back in the loop here. And as always, feel free to reach out with any questions. We love it when you guys shout us out on Twitter. Makes us feel good about what we're doing and the money we're not making. Yeah. Yeah. All right. With that, we will see you next time. And that should be Monday. Yep.
Sounds
all
good.
right.
Thanks for listening.
Yep.
Thanks, Mark.
See you guys. Bye. Will.